Okay, now for those of you who worry about such things as the weather, we are getting updates, and there's a chance that we'll stop early today, but I don't count on that because that is certainly not my preference, and we're going to watch it for you, and we don't want anybody's safety, of course, to be in jeopardy at all. So be aware of that, and also. In terms of keeping going and keeping the case moving, I can tell you that we're ahead of what was the original schedule in terms of the far out parts of the time period you were asked about. We're ahead of that. I don't think there's any likelihood at all. I'm not ruling it out, but I don't think there's any likelihood at all we'll reach maximum time periods that were outlined. So that's as much as I can tell you right now, because it's as much as I know. All right, go ahead, Mr. Albee.
Thank you, Judge.
Oh, yes. Oh, would you gentlemen come up for a second? You know what? Remember that time the other day when I asked you to step out and just stand in the hallway, and you were staying there for what, about 20 minutes? This is going to be really short. So do me that favor, would you? And it's my fault. I forgot to do something I was supposed to do. During the break, Doctor had approached me and and I didn't hear too much of what she had to say. I gather she stated she wanted to clarify something she had said earlier. And is that right?
Yeah, I gave an answer that it was incomplete. And while I was sitting here, you know, I knew that there was more to it, but I couldn't put my finger on what the source was.
Go ahead and tell him what it was.
Okay. Mr. Albee asked me where I got the information about Mrs. Jensen being sick in November, and it was in the statement by Aaron Dillard, but I knew I'd seen it elsewhere, and I thought it had been like maybe an Ed Klug's testimony, but I remembered as I was walking the halls that he told Dr. Borman the same thing. And that's what I wanted to convey.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to entertain argument on this. She's just clarified an answer, and if you want to have this restated before the jury, if you want to inquire on it, whatever you want to do, but
Yeah, the only thing is I had understood that all along. I mean, the information came from Mark Jensen. I mean, there's no dispute about that. I thought that already was in the record. So.
What do you want me to do?
Well, I guess we just call back. I'll just decide if I want to handle it some particular way.
Ask the jurors to come in, please. Okay.
Please all rise.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Albee.
Dr. Mainland, as I understand it, there's something you want to clarify in regard to the questions about when Julie Jensen was sick in her home when Mark was out of town. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the additional information you had is that in Dr. Borman's letter to Detective Ratsburg, he indicated that Mark Jensen reported to him that Julie had been sick in November while he was in St. Louis, right?
Correct.
That's also in police reports, true?
I can't remember. I can't remember. So.
That is, this information about Julie Jensen getting sick in November originally came from Mark Jensen, true?
Yes.
And Mark Jensen's statements to Dr. Borman that Dr. Borman recalled in his letter do not say anything about observing any particular signs associated with ethylene glycol poisoning, correct?
Let me look once, because I think he mentioned specific symptoms. I'm not positive. Yes, he did mention specific symptoms.
Well, he indicated that she had vomited from the bedroom to the bathroom, right?
Yes,
That she had not cleaned it up,
yes,
correct? And that he'd had trouble reaching her by telephone, correct?
yes.
He doesn't say anything about her being intoxicated, correct?
No,
He doesn't say anything about her exhibiting breathing symptoms, correct?
correct.
So what symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning are there?
Vomiting.
Well, those are the ones we already knew about, right?
Well, we knew about it, I just wanted to be complete because the impression was that my sole source of, or our sole source of that information was Aaron Dillard. And I wanted to clarify that part of it,
I don't know if...
that it was not just Aaron Dillard who said that.
Right, but Mark Jensen reported it to his doctor and to the police as evidence of some depression that Julie had been suffering, correct?
I don't know what it was offered as. I know he did report it to the doctor, and if you say it's in the police report, I guess I believe you. I'd have to look at it again for myself.
He reported it to his doctor as a historical concern he had about Julie's health, right?
I don't know why he reported it to his doctor.
He reported it in conjunction with other medical information that he was providing about Julie, right?
He was in for his own illness at that time, and he just related that incident from November.
And that was about 10 days after Julie's death, right?
11.
And it's Mark Jensen that reported she was vomiting, right?
Yes,
And that she didn't clean it up, right?
yes.
There was no report that Julie Jensen did not tend to her everyday activities during that period of time when Mark was out of town, right?
No, I haven't seen anything about that.
You recognize that psychiatrists, in determining whether somebody has a depressive disorder, rely on certain criteria?
Yes, I think now it's DSM-4, if I'm not mistaken.
And the DSM-4 provides the criteria for determining whether somebody qualifies as having a depressive disorder? Is that right?
I believe so.
And what are those criteria that you would rely on in determining if somebody has a depressive disorder?
I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't have it memorized.
So you don't know what those criteria are for determining if somebody has a depressive disorder?
I can probably venture a guess at many of them, but I cannot recite them verbatim from DSM-4.
Did you examine DSM-4 to try to determine whether Julie Jensen had a depressive disorder?
No.
Did you also recognize that the American Psychiatric Association has guidelines for helping determine suicide risk?
I wasn't aware of that specifically, but I am not surprised.
Are you aware of certain psychosocial stressors that have been deemed to be associated with increased suicide risk?
Not specifically. I mean, all I know is that in general, you know, stressors can, you know, push somebody over the edge, but I don't know the specific list.
You don't know what specific items a psychiatrist might put greater emphasis on?
No.
The last thing I have were just a couple of portions I'd overlooked regarding the transcript, Exhibit 142. Is that still in front of you?
Yes.
This will be brief. Bottom of page 59, the last line, line 25.
I see it.
Okay. I think I'd done the top of page 60, but I don't think I had page 159. And the question from Detective Ratsberg was, how do we explain the petechiae in the lungs then?
Wait a second, what page did you say?
159 of the transcript.
Oh, I went to
I'm sorry,
59.
because I have that Bates stamp too, yeah.
I went to 59, no wonder it didn't match. Okay,
It says, how do we explain the petechiae in the lungs then? I mean, there has to be some type of injury here to the chest and to the neck area, which I can see could almost combine. They're that close. You see that question by Detective Ratsberg?
yes,
And the beginning part of that question is, he's looking for something to explain the petechiae in the lungs, correct?
yes,
And the last portion is page 161, line 19. And there, Detective Ratsberg asks the question, we still have to explain the nose part, the head pushed into the pillow. How are we going to explain that? I mean, that's there. Answer, because I mean there was her robe, or possibly another pillow, her robe, and it looks like some decorator pillows were on the bed. Is that question and answer asked?
yes.
Object to the hearsay, I mean, Your Honor, but the defendant's statements.
That's fine. The question is really what I was keying on here.
Well, then I'd request that the defendant's response be stricken and not be displayed to the
No
jury.
objection at
Well,
all.
don't display it to the jury either.
Just a moment. Take it off. Take it off.
Well, I wasn't showing it. I have no objection to striking it, Judge.
All right, it'll be strict.
Well, then I object to it having been shown, and if counsel's going to be showing
All
you
right,
more portions
all
of
right, don't, just
what I'm requesting.
put it back until, don't put it up there again until the court approves.
And Your Honor, what counsel's proposing to do is just show a question, and he's blocking off the remainder, so that there's nothing other than the question showing. I don't have an objection to that being displayed to the jury.
I think we're good. May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
And line 19. We still have to explain the nose part, the head pushed into the pillow. How are we going to explain that? I mean, that's there. That was Detective Ratsberg's question.
Yes,
So these two excerpts that I've just shown you, Detective Ratsberg made clear to Mr. Jensen that he was looking for an explanation about the nose, right?
yes,
And he was looking for an explanation for the petechiae in the lungs, correct?
yes,
And if Aaron Dillard saw this document, he'd know that Detective Ratsberg was looking for an explanation for those kinds of things, correct?
Objection, irrelevant hypothetical, Your Honor, unless there's going to be some testimony showing that Aaron Dillard ever saw that, and there has been no testimony to that effect.
Overruled.
if Aaron Dillard saw this document and saw those two experts and,
Excerpts?
experts, yeah,
Excerpts or experts?
excerpts. I'm sorry, I'm into the legal, I'm an expert witness, sorry. If Aaron Dillard saw this document and honed in on those certain experts, he, can we break? Excerpts. He could have come to that conclusion.
Thank you. That's all.
Now, you've gone through that entire transcript, read it from cover to cover.
Yes, sir.
Now, is there anything in there where it's described that the defendant sat on Julie's chest after, there is something there about rolling her over, correct?
Yes.
Is there anything in there, though, where he sat on her chest and shoved her head and neck into the pillow?
No.
And you'd read that transcript months ago, maybe
Yes.
even years ago.
Yeah, I can't remember.
But after you read that transcript, you still were offering the opinion of what? What was your opinion after reading that transcript? What was your opinion as to the cause and manner of death in this case?
At that time, my opinion was ethylene glycol poisoning homicide.
And even after reading your transcript, reading that transcript, that was still your opinion, right?
Yes.
But then you read heard of Aaron Dillard's description of Mark Jensen's statement to him,
Yes.
and you changed your opinion.
I would say that I added to my opinion.
Okay. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you added to your opinion. And what was it about Aaron Dillard's statement that caused you to add to your opinion?
I thought it was very believable. I thought there was way too much detail in there for anyone to make up. There were too many coincidences in the statement, and it corresponded beautifully with the physical findings and the toxicology findings.
Now, there was testimony or cross-examination about how the initial responder, Mr. Wilkinson, moved Julie Jensen. I mean, there was cross-examination on that. Do you remember
Yes.
that? And there was also questioning about artifact injuries resulting from resuscitative activity.
Yeah, I think we touched on that.
That objection, I think that misstates the evidence.
I think you should rephrase what you
Okay,
said.
well, first of all, can you state whether or not you're aware that whether there was any resuscitative efforts made, and a CPR or anything like that performed on Julie Jensen?
I know there was not.
There was no resuscitative effort.
No.
Now, there was cross-examination about the record in this case indicating that the defendant, Mark Jensen, was crying when Officer Riley responded to the scene, correct?
I think we talked about that.
Now tell me, doctor, how many autopsies have you either conducted yourself or been or participated in during the course of your training?
Conducted myself, the number would be somewhere between 1,750 and 2,000. I haven't tallied it up recently. Participated in, 3 times that much.
So maybe as many as almost 5,000 or 6,000 autopsies.
Sure.
Now I would imagine some of those autopsies pertained to persons who were murdered by a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yes.
And in addition to conducting the autopsy, you also read the reports that come with those, correct?
The police reports you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, is it unusual or is it common for a person who murders his or her spouse or his or her significant other to behave as though they're bereaved when the police arrive on the scene?
I can say that I have seen that before.
Even when they're the person that committed the murder?
Yes, I can say that I have seen that before.
It's kind of inconsistent with the idea of getting away with it to act as though you're overjoyed at your spouse's death.
I would say so.
And if you want to conceal the fact that you murdered your spouse, perhaps the first step is to act like you're upset when the police arrive.
Yes.
Now, you were also asked about who's in a better position to evaluate a spouse's condition in the weeks and months preceding her death. Would it be the husband or would it be neighbors? You were asked that question, right?
Yes.
Now, in a case where a spouse, where the husband is the accused murderer, who would be a more reliable source of information concerning the victim in the weeks and months preceding the death? The husband, who's accused of the murder, or a neighbor who has, by any estimation, has no connection to the homicide?
The neighbor.
And who would be a more objective source of information concerning the condition of the victim in the weeks and months preceding her death in such a homicide, an alleged homicide case? The friend, the immediate family members of the homicide suspect, or the immediate family members of the victim?
I would say the latter.
There was also testimony that Dr. Borman prescribed Ambien for Julie Jensen. Is that true?
Yes.
Now, is there any evidence in the record that Dr. Borman first called Julie Jensen before he prescribed the Ambien?
No.
At the time that Dr. Borman prescribed the Ambien, what person and what person alone was it that Dr. Borman was relying upon in deciding to prescribe the Ambien in this case?
Mark Jensen.
And did Dr. Borman tell Mark Jensen what he should do if Julie's condition did not improve or if it deteriorated after he prescribed this Ambien?
Yes, he did.
What did Dr. Borman tell Mark Jensen he should do?
Objection to the relevance to this witness's opinion.
I can check in my notes for the exact wording, but I think he said something about taking her to the emergency room.
Check in your notes if it would help you.
Yes. I reinforced the necessity for follow-up either with me or a psychiatrist or a psychologist and suggested she go to the ER if symptoms became worse.
Now you have heard Mark Jensen's description of Julie Jensen's symptoms during the time period between Tuesday, or I should say heard or read, the Mark Jensen's descriptions of Julie Jensen's symptoms between Tuesday night and Thursday at the time of her death, correct?
Yes.
And would you say that looking at what Mark Jensen has to say about Julie Jensen's condition, did her condition deteriorate after the Ambien was prescribed or after it was administered, or did her condition improve?
It deteriorated.
And is there any evidence in the record that Mark Jensen followed the advice that was given to him by his family physician?
No.
In fact, the evidence is just quite the contrary, isn't that so?
Yes.
There was also cross-examination about ethylene glycol or antifreeze remaining in the stomach 30 hours post-ingestion, correct?
Yes.
Tell us the circumstances under which you are aware of that one case where there was some ethylene glycol in the stomach 30 hours post-ingestion.
It was a case that made it to the hospital, and it was a larger suicidal dose. And
the person was placed on dialysis.
yes.
Neither of those circumstances, in fact, so there were three circumstances. Number one, it was a very large suicidal dose.
Yes.
Number two, the person was transported to the hospital.
Correct.
Number three, the person was placed on dialysis.
Correct.
None of those three criteria apply in this case.
No, none of that happened.
So that 30-hour episode really doesn't have anything to do with the facts of this case.
Leading, argumentative.
Restate the question.
Well, in your estimation, does that one incident, that one recorded case of ethylene glycol remaining in the stomach 30 hours post-ingestion, does it have anything to do with the facts of this case?
I don't think it's fair to compare it because of the differences we talked about. The person was taken to the hospital, the person was put on dialysis, the half-life, well, no, strike that. It was a person who received medical attention. So it's really hard to compare those with those who don't.
But when you're looking at the emptying of ethylene glycol from the stomach, would it be fair to say that to some extent that's a function of the quantity of ethylene glycol in the stomach to begin with?
Yes.
Would it be fair to say it's also a function of the half-life of the ethylene glycol in the person's stomach?
No. Or
Okay.
in the stomach? The
Yes.
half-life in the stomach.
Well, in other words, of the metabolic rate of the individual who ingested the ethylene glycol.
There is some absorption from the stomach.
Well, explain that.
The same enzyme in the liver that breaks down ethylene glycol, the first step of the metabolism, is present in the walls of the stomach.
So what are the factors that influence the length of time that it takes from the point of ingestion of ethylene glycol to the point where it's entirely gone from the stomach?
The dose and the timing, the dose is the main one.
So you don't think there's a large variation in the rate of metabolism in terms of the rate at which the ethylene glycol is eliminated from the one person's stomach as opposed to another person's stomach?
I haven't seen evidence that shows a big variation in that.
And what is the half-life of ethylene glycol in the stomach in your estimation, from your experience?
All I can say is that we don't do experiments on humans with this because it's poisonous. The half-life, in the literature, it's noted as rapid and complete. And the peak blood level is said to occur at the time period commonly cited is 1 to 4 hours.
And what does that tell you about how much ethylene glycol you would expect to find in a person's stomach 6 hours post-ingestion?
Again, it would depend on how much they took. But, yeah,
Let's say it's a small dose.
if it were a small dose, I'd expect it to be gone.
And if it were a large dose?
I may expect some of it to remain.
Now, in this instance, what is the basis for the opinion which you've already stated about there being one or more smaller doses of ethylene glycol? What was it about the toxicological results in this case that supports or could possibly refute that conclusion?
All right. Julie Jensen received ethylene glycol sometime on the afternoon or evening of December 1st. She lived for more than 36 hours, closer to 48, I think, if I do the math. At that time, she still had unabsorbed ethylene glycol in her stomach, unmetabolized ethylene glycol in her blood, and she was significantly acidotic. Had there been a single suicidal dose, in my expert opinion, I believe she would not have lasted that long.
And have you ever heard of there being ethylene glycol in the stomach of a person who did not receive dialysis and did not receive medical treatment for more than 24 hours?
I can't answer that. I really don't know.
Well, have you ever heard of it?
No.
So you can answer it. So
Right.
you've never heard of that?
I'm making it too hard.
Yeah. Your Honor, I have some more questions of this witness, but regrettably, the document that I was relying upon, it was a marked copy of Exhibit 142. I left it back in my hotel room. I apologize. So I'd request that we break for lunch early so that I can go pick it up and pick up on my redirect examination, or redirect examination after lunch.
All right. Let me ask that you return folks at 10 minutes to 1. Is that convenient for everybody? And please don't talk about the case.
Please all rise.
Good afternoon, everyone. And continue, Mr. Albee.
It was actually Mr. Jamboys.
Excuse me, Mr. Jump.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I mistook you in the fog. What's it like outside, by the way? It's pretty foggy now?
Yeah, I just drove here, and it wasn't at all when I drove here, but I look outside now, and suddenly it must have just come on in the last few minutes. Now, Doctor, yesterday you were being cross-examined by Mr. Albee on this issue of some of Detective Ratsburg's statements in the course of this interview. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
When I say this interview, I'm talking about the interview that occurred in April 1999 where the defendant, or where Mark Jensen, where Detective Ratsburg interviewed the defendant, Mark Jensen.
Yes.
And now, first of all, Doctor, when you became involved in this case, did you learn something of the history in terms of what kind of toxicological information the prosecution or the law enforcement was working on at the time that this interview occurred?
I know that by that time, toxicology results had come back from the first lab that things were sent to. I think it was the first lab, National Medical Services. And the ethylene glycol was reported as negative. This was before the samples were then sent on to St. Louis and before Dr. Lavin discovered the crystals in the kidneys.
And might that account for the reason that, or the manner or the direction of the questioning that Detective Ratsburg was employing with respect to the witness at that time?
Calls for speculation.
Well, let's go through the portions that you were asked about. And I would direct, do you have, is it Exhibit 142?
Yep.
Do you have that in front of you?
I do.
And directing your attention to page 69, starting at line 15, and you recall being asked about this?
Let me get there. Yes.
Now let's go through the factual assertions that were contained within the question that was posed by Detective Ratsburg one by one, okay?
Sure.
Okay, so line 15, you found nothing disturbed in the house. That was a factual assertion by Detective Ratsburg, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you have any information that would cause you to think that there's anything inconsistent with the facts in this case with that particular statement?
Judge, that this line of questioning with this witness at this time would not be relevant, as the questions were not introduced for the truth of the matter, as there was no suggestion that Detective Ratsburg is expressing the truth, but for the possible knowledge and source of information for Aaron Dillard.
I can see that, Your Honor, but this is pretty much preliminary because then the next questions do relate. The next factual assertions do relate to that.
Go ahead.
Well, we'll just go to the next one then, because I don't want to get into some areas that are irrelevant for this. The next factual assertion is her head is pushed into the pillow, correct?
Yes.
And after that, there's a bruise on her buttocks,
Yes.
correct? Then the next thing is Detective Ratsburg is perhaps speculating about some scenario about, quote, you guys were playing around, or maybe you guys had a violent argument, and he doesn't know, correct?
Yes.
But there's no specific factual assertion there in terms of what the physical condition of Julie Jensen was.
No.
Then the next factual assertion is the toxicology is a 0,
Yes.
and which is what the NMS had found.
Yes.
And then he makes reference to what Dr. Chambliss lists as the injuries, correct?
Correct.
And let's go through this. Dr. Chambliss, right here, list of injuries that are on there. The bruises I was talking about with the chin, with the shin. And, here's the evidence. There's also petechiae in her lungs, which indicates suffocation. you get petechia when somebody's suffocated. And well, I understand that medically you don't agree with that assessment, do you?
No, I don't.
So whatever Detective Ratsburg's strengths may be as a law enforcement officer, he leaves something to be desired as a forensic pathologist.
He's certainly a better cop than I am.
Yeah. And he says you get petechia when somebody's suffocated. Well, that's not necessarily untrue, is it?
It's,
Or is it? Because I'm not a pathologist either. So can you get petechia when somebody's suffocated?
you probably could, but I don't think, you can have suffocation where there's absolutely nothing. And I think a lot of times lay people and law enforcement and attorneys confuse suffocation with strangulation. Petechiae are very common in strangulation, but that's not the same as suffocation. And I've run up against that a number of times in talking to cops.
No. He then goes on in his question, which is really more like a statement, but there's two places you get petechia. One is in the eye and in the lungs, especially if there's pressure. And then he goes on to correctly acknowledge that he's not a doctor or an expert. And in fact, he's probably wrong on both those points, right? With respect to a suffocation.
Judge, again, this wasn't offered for the truth.
Your question.
Okay, now, but looking at that question from line 15, page 69, to line 5 on page 70, there's no reference in there to the injuries to the rib cage in this case, are there?
No.
So let's go to the next factual assertion and I want to go through the ones that counsel got you. Directing your attention to page 74, line 10. And the question is, why is that bruise there on her buttocks? So there's a reference to a bruise on her buttocks, correct?
Yes.
But again, looking at page 74, and then further down, I don't leave anything out, on line 20, what the evidence suggests is that there was a pillow over her head, correct?
Yes.
And later on line 24, okay, you saw the nose and put a pillow over her head. And then the answer is no. So there the inquiry was about somebody putting a pillow over Julie Jensen's head.
Correct.
But again, there's no reference there to the injuries, to the hemorrhages on the left side of Julie Jensen's chest.
No.
Then we go to the answer on page 75. And, well, the question is, there has to be an explanation. You were the guy there. And the answer on line 18, answer, when I left, for all I know, she was asleep exactly the way I found her when I got home. Her face was in the pillow. She rolled over on the pillow. If I remember correctly, her hand was underneath. But again, there's no reference to any injury to her rib cage in this questioning at that point, is there?
No.
And then to page 76. Again, at line 5, down through line 8, there's a reference to her nose is scrunched in the pillow. But again, there's no reference to anything about the bruising or the hemorrhaging on the chest, is there?
No.
And then, and I want to make sure I don't leave anything out, on page 76, line 12, and here it's clear that Detective Ratsburg is showing the defendant the photograph of Julie's nose, correct? And he says, and the nose, and again, you can take a look at the photos, I'll show you. Her nose, when you bring it back up, is bent like this. I mean, there was some type of force put on there. And the only person that could have been there to commit that type of force is you. Now, again, there's no reference to any injury to the rib cage, is there?
No.
And there's no indication in terms of that force, whether the force is because the face is pushed into the pillow or the pillow is pushed over the face, is there? In other words, the precise mechanism is not described in this question.
No.
And then page 80. Again, on line 19 through line 22, the Detective Ratsberg is making reference to the petechiae in the lungs and suggesting there's some type of force or contact made because of the petechiae of the lungs. But once again, there's no indication of any injury to the chest, of the hemorrhages to the chest, to the rib cage.
No.
And then on page 81, line 12, starting at line 12.
I'm sorry, Council, what page?
Page 81, Counsel. And I want to make sure I get the whole question in. So question, okay, well, the doctor here is a few minor blunt trauma injuries are also identified, okay? He's assuming there's petechiae of the lungs at this point, showing that there's attempted medical. Like, excuse me, like an example, they take the tube and put it down your throat to get you breathing. That will cause petechiae of the lungs because you're actually injuring them, okay? And of course, doctor, from a medical perspective, you've never heard of a procedure like that where they cause petechiae to the lungs as a result of putting a tube down somebody's throat?
I don't think the two are directly connected.
So it's medically a suspect assessment by Detective Ratsberg, but once again, there's no reference to the hemorrhage to the rib cage.
No.
Now, if there were more questions about the things that Detective Ratsberg assessed, I guess I don't have them here, but looking through here, do you recall finding any reference by Detective Ratsberg in the course of his interview with Mark Jensen? Any reference at all to these hemorrhages to the rib cage?
No.
And there's certainly no indication anywhere in this transcript of this interview about how the injuries to the rib cage line up with the arm. Well, is there or isn't there?
The objection's over.
No.
And now, doctor, and again, you'd read this transcript before you offered your initial opinion in this case, correct?
Yes.
So looking at this transcript, was there anything in there that would cause you to conclude, reasonably to suspect that Mark Jensen, in the last few moments of Julie Jensen's life, rolled her over, sat on her back or on her chest, the back of her chest, and shoved her face and neck into the pillow and asphyxiated her?
No.
And is there anything, so there was nothing in this report that would cause a medical examiner to come to that conclusion. Is there anything in here that would cause any reasonable layperson to come to the conclusion, just based upon what's in here?
I object because the question is to any medical examiner, apparently this medical examiner, but not the universe of medical examiners.
Well,
Actually, the question now is about a layperson.
Well, it started out with the premise, this would not cause the medical examiner to conclude X.
Well, I'll withdraw that
The bottom
part.
line is, the bottom line is it's argumentative.
Okay, either way.
Because the jurors are lay people and they can make their own decision on it.
Okay. Well, doctor, you've now had an opportunity to read through this entire. We'll strike that. I'll start over again. You were also asked questions during the course of cross-examination about where it is in the file or where it is that you had evidence concerning, or you'd found evidence concerning Julie Jensen's condition in the last few days of her life, correct?
Correct.
Did you find in your file or in the investigative information that was provided to you any description that was provided concerning Julie Jensen's condition in the last 2 or 3 days of her life?
Yes.
And who was the person that actually provided that description?
Paul Griffin.
And where did Paul Griffin?
I'm sorry. Yes, provided.
Who was the person that provided the description to Paul Griffin?
Mark Jensen.
And what did Mark Jensen say about Julie Jensen's condition in the last 2 or 3 days of her life, to the extent that you can remember?
Okay.
My previous objection on hearsay grounds. And Judge, and also 90705, because he's the proponent rather than the cross-examiner. I didn't elicit those details.
But this is just,
This was inquired into on cross-examination, Your Honor, and I believe that I have a right to rehabilitate the witness and establish a basis for her opinions concerning the condition. So tell us what...
but Mr. Jensen's going to be made available?
Mr. Griffin, you mean?
Griffin.
Yes, sir. Mr. Griffin
ahead.
is available. So go ahead and tell us what your recollection is of what the defendant told Paul Griffin concerning Julie Jensen's condition in the last 2 or 3 days of her life.
Okay, he started with Tuesday evening, and he says that she was fine Tuesday evening, and sometime in the overnight hours, Tuesday to Wednesday, she started acting drunk and goofy. Now, I'm paraphrasing. I'm not, you know, I can read it right out of the report if you want, but I'm paraphrasing. Then he says that she was, on Wednesday, he says,
I apologize to interrupt for just a moment. And Judge, I just need to raise this Sixth Amendment issue too. So I don't think I specifically stated that.
Okay. He says he only saw her get up out of bed once on Wednesday, and that was in the morning. And he describes her on Wednesday mostly sleeping. He describes her being out of it. He describes her being thirsty. He describes her as vomiting. And he tells Paul Griffin that she should have been someplace, meaning a hospital, even on Wednesday. He describes that her breathing starts to get raspy Wednesday night, and by Thursday morning it's really bad, and she's not even able to move in bed by herself. He's got to prop her up so the kids can see her in the morning. And then he describes leaving her lying on her back in bed. And I'm sure I left some things out.
Well, do you recall him making the statement, she got the...
I continue to object on the grounds previously raised in terms of not Chapter 968.
The objection's overruled.
Do you recall him making the statement, she got the first signs of anything that were 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Wednesday morning, and she proceeded to get worse during the whole period of time. There was not a period of time when you saw her bounce back or get better. Do you recall him making a statement like that?
Yes, I remember reading that.
And directing your attention again to the instructions that Dr. Borman says in his report that he gave to Mark Jensen. What was the instruction that Dr. Borman gave to Mark Jensen at the time that he prescribed the Ambien?
Well, no, that's asked and answered even on this reading.
I'm sorry, what?
That was asked and answered before lunch.
I have no further questions.
Dr. Mainland, prior to that interview, April 21st, 1999, between Detective Ratsberg and Mark Jensen, just so the record's clear, Dr. Lavin had discovered the crystals, correct?
I don't think so. I'm not positive. I know the toxicology was resent in May.
Wasn't the reason that they were sent out for specifically ethylene glycol testing was because Dr. Lavin had discovered crystals in the kidneys?
Yes.
So she already had discovered those, correct?
No, I believe that the initial reason for sending it out was because of poisoning things that were found on the computer.
Do you know when Dr. Lavin found the crystals?
No, I could find out though.
Is that in your file?
Not sure.
Well, where would it be if it's not in your file?
I've got the slides in my car. They probably have a date on them.
Is there anything in your file that would tell you when Dr. Lavin found those?
I can only infer it from when the toxicology was sent. There may be something in the file. If there is, I can't recall it right now, something more specific.
And she also could have sent them to NMS initially because of the concern about crystals, right?
No, I don't think so.
Well, first it was sent to the Wisconsin State Laboratory, right?
Correct.
They don't test for ethylene glycol at that laboratory, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
But they came back with results as to what else was in her blood, correct?
Yes.
And then the test was sent, the blood was sent specifically to NMS because crystals had been found and they wanted to test for ethylene glycol. Isn't that true?
I'm under the impression that the crystals had not been found yet because this was within, I want to say 2 to 3 weeks after Julie Jensen's death. And takes longer than that to make slides and get them back.
My question is, as of April 21st, 1999, slides?
I'm not sure.
All right. From the information you've reviewed in Exhibit 142, Detective Ratsburg made clear that there was some injury to the lung area, correct?
He calls it injury.
And a lay person or a cop may view that as injury to the lung area, right?
Yes,
The lungs are in the chest, correct?
in most people.
Detective Ratsburg also asked a number of questions about whether there was some striking of the chest, correct?
Something about contact. I don't remember exactly the word striking. It may be in there. Something about contact.
At least about pushing on the chest?
Like with regard to CPR, I remember us discussing that.
He specifically says there's some type of contact at the chest, correct?
Excuse me, Counsel, what page are you on?
I'm not at any page yet, but I mean, that's something you acknowledge, that there's something about contact at the chest?
He does ask Mark Jensen. Yes, he does.
There are a number of questions by Mr. Jamboys regarding whether Detective Ratsburg asked anything about the ribs, correct?
Yes.
Aaron Dillard didn't say anything about ribs, right?
Not to my knowledge, no.
That is, if Detective Ratsburg had asked a whole bunch of questions about ribs, then perhaps that would have shown up in Aaron Dillard's statement.
Objection calls for speculation.
Well, it does, but sustain.
That would have provided if Detective Ratsburg had asked many questions about ribs to Aaron Dillard, that would have provided Aaron Dillard potentially with a source for saying that there was a rib injury, right?
Objection, again, it's an irrelevant hypothetical. It calls for
Judge,
speculation.
this speaking objection,
It's argumentative.
I have a motion in limine on that objection from the prosecutor. I thought that we'd done that before.
Just move on and we'll take up anything at the next break.
You were asked this morning about who's more credible, right?
I don't think we were comparing one person to another head to head. I think you were asking me about, how I consider witnesses credible or.
Mr. Jamboys was asking you whether you consider someone who's accused of murder less credible.
Yes,
You understand that our Constitution gives us a presumption of innocence?
yes, I do.
That innocent people are charged with crimes? You understand that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But you're not willing to give somebody an even start simply because they've been charged before you get on board in a case?
I did give him an even start.
Well, you told Mr. Jamboys that you wouldn't find somebody who is accused of murder as credible as a next-door neighbor.
Objection, Your Honor, that's not what the witness
I think
testified to.
I took her answer to be in conjunction with this case.
Well, and I started out asking her that, and she said, I thought I was just talking about people generally.
Well, Your Honor, I object to the question also because that wasn't the language that was employed in either the question or the answer.
You'll have to, I'm going to sustain the objection.
You didn't investigate the other witnesses in this case, right?
What do you mean by investigate?
You didn't investigate their background, right?
No,
You didn't talk to them, correct?
no,
You understand that people other than the accused have their own biases, correct?
potentially.
You are aware that witnesses can have their memories and testimony tainted by hearing the speculation and rumor of others, right?
Possibly.
Mr. Jamboys asked you some questions about the half-life of ethylene glycol in the stomach.
Yes,
There is no such thing.
not to my knowledge.
You did not correct Mr. Jamboys.
I think I said to the jury that I don't think that there is such a thing as a half-life in the stomach. And then we were talking about gastric emptying time. I think he asked his question. To tell you the God's honest truth, there were so many questions, I don't remember exactly what I said, but.
You understand that you understand Paul Griffin to be Julie Jensen's brother, right?
Yes,
You understand that he would have certain biases in this case, correct?
yes,
And you understand there's a stigma associated with depression and suicide, correct?
yes,
Ultimately, this finding of suffocation in this case depends on the credibility of Aaron Dillard, right?
not completely.
There are signs in the autopsy that would be consistent with suffocation, right?
Yes, or
those-
with, yes,
But all those signs are also consistent with postmortem artifact, correct?
yes,
And they're also consistent with some innocent contact or injury, correct?
yes. However, we don't take the isolated injuries into account. We take the pattern.
And you had the opportunity to take that pattern into account in August when you testified, right? Or in late July?
Yes, I did.
And you had the chance to review all the photographs in late July, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you'd reviewed all the autopsy photos, correct?
Yes, I had.
And your change of opinion is based on you relying on the word of Aaron Dillard, right?
No.
If Aaron Dillard was telling a lie, there is no basis for suffocation.
No, that's not true.
Without Aaron Dillard, you testified in July, you could not prove that Julie Jensen was suffocated, right?
When I testified in July, I said I could not prove she was suffocated. I said I could not rule it out.
Okay, let me try again. You said you could not prove suffocation in July, right?
I think so. I said I couldn't rule it out.
Did you say you could not prove it?
You have to look back in the transcript and see what words I used.
What did she testify?
July 30, August 1.
I got a copy I can look too.
Page 67.
Just read it.
And it's line 6 on page 67. You're there?
I didn't pull it out.
Okay.
But I'll take your word for it.
I'll read you the whole sentence in a moment. But line 6 says, I can't prove it.
Okay, then that's
Relating
what
to
I said.
asphyxia.
Then that's the word I used.
In lines 4 to 6, I can't rule out that there is an element of asphyxia, but I can't prove it.
Correct. Okay. You refreshed my memory. Thank you.
Do you think that's unfair?
Objection, Your Honor, the question is vague.
And the only thing that's changed since you gave that testimony, I can't prove it, is Aaron Dillard.
Objection, first of all, it's only a partial description of the witness's testimony. She said, I can't rule it out, and I can't prove it.
Well, but the objection is overruled. You could answer the question, yes or no. Well,
Yes.
you can answer the question.
Yes.
Thank you, that's all.
Is that document over here where the liar, thief, convict, is that still appearing on? Do you know?
Probably. I don't think it's on there. But I could be wrong.
I think it's right here. You weren't here when Mr. Dillard was examined, but would you disagree with it that Aaron Dillard could be reasonably construed as a liar?
I think he was convicted of it on the basis of that.
And he's a convict,
Yes.
and a con man,
Yes.
and a thief,
I don't remember that specifically, but I guess it wouldn't surprise me.
and a criminal.
Yes.
So why on earth would you consider anything that Aaron Dillard has to say as being sufficiently reliable to form the basis for your opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty in this case?
Because, as I've said a few times already, Aaron Dillard had details both about that matched both the physical findings and the toxicology in this case. And I don't think the average crook could have put that together himself and could have got that anywhere else from anyone else but Mark Jensen. This is what we call history. I was talking about history and physical. When you go to the doctor takes a history, does the physical. This is an additional bit of history, and I believe it for the reasons stated.
Not because Aaron Dillard is credible. He's not, as a human being, he's not a particular, I would say that there's the vast majority of people that we all know.
Objection to what Mr. Jamboys would say.
Why don't you start over? You're on a really good.
Would it be, okay, I agree, it's a bad start. Let me start over. Would you agree that the vast majority of people that the average person knows would probably be considered more credible as a human being than Aaron Dillard, given his prior history?
Like say my circle of friends or the jury's circle of friends or whoever?
Well, knowing what you know about Aaron Dillard, would you buy a used car from him?
Hell no.
Okay. You know, my father used to describe, there's a person that he said, if you ever shake his hand, count your fingers. And isn't that
This is argumentative.
Well,
This is argumentative. No, please.
okay.
I've been through a lot with this witness, and I don't think we need to have argumentative questions from either side, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Nothing further?
You can step down.
Thank you, Doctor.